Hi everyone, I'm Carlos Abaton. I am the Communications Director for IT-ROI. I want to welcome you to our webinar, Stop Struggling with XOG. I will be your virtual host today. Our featured speaker will be Federico Peña. I'm sure you know him. And we will get to him in a few minutes, just after we go over some housekeeping items. So just to get the most value out of this webinar, we encourage you to ask questions. You need to go to the question box located in the right side of the screen on the GoToWebinar panel. Just type there your questions so we can make sure that Federico will get them. Let's start the webinar, and here's Federico Peña.
All right, well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. I want to thank everybody for attending this webinar. As Carlos mentioned, we do want you to ask questions. The more questions that you ask, the more benefit that you're going to get out of this webinar. While I start, I'm going to go on, cover a couple of slides regarding the webinar topics, but I would really like for you guys, specifically if you have any particular pain points with XOG that you would like me to cover during this webinar, any particular issues that you might have, ask away. Feel free to ask away so we can make this webinar interactive and I can cover those topics. A lot of the topics that I'm going to be covering today, one of them is going to be importing large data sets into CA PPM, importing and exporting large data sets, right? A lot of people have issues, with exporting portlets. We're going to give you a couple of tips on getting some workarounds. And once we export that data from CA PPM, I'm going to show you how you can utilize those exports to pivot that data and utilize that data in reports that you can hand to your executives. We're going to get into some tips and tricks. So the tips and tricks part is really where I'm looking for everyone's input, all right? Ask a lot of questions regarding, particular issues that you might be having. So most of the items that we're going to be doing are going to be related to the XOG and Query Bridge. I know that most of you that are on this call probably have access to the XOG and Query Bridge. For those of you that do not have access, please feel free to register. The URL is at the bottom. It's xogbridge.itroisolutions.com. And it'll be really handy if you register right away because you'll be able to follow through with a lot of the items that we're going to be covering during the webinar, and you might be able to ask particular questions regarding some functionality that you might be needing or your business might be requiring you to do, and we'd be happy to get that answered to you. But one of the things that I want to make sure that everyone is aware also, the XOG and Query Bridge is fully supported, so there's a support link. If something isn't working or if there's a tip or enhancement or an enhancement request where you guys want some functionality that it isn't currently doing, I would love to hear from you guys. We want to make this obviously a tool. The more user-friendly it is and the more you guys use it, the more benefit you get out of it, the more everybody wins. So if we get your feedback, then we're going to be able to really enhance the functionality to meet the needs of all of the users. This tool, we rolled it out and we give it for free. We started off probably a year and a half or 2 years ago. And I think we have over 2,000 Clarity users that utilize this tool. We hardly ever get any support tickets or enhancement requests for it, but we would really like to understand what it is that you need it to do so we can try and improve that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be covering is importing large data sets into CA PPM. We're going to be using a component of the XOG and Query Bridge called the data loader. Okay, and what the data loader allows you to do is to map Excel files to XOG files. I'm going to show you guys how to do that, what the syntax is that's involved in that, and how you can utilize this tool to load that data in once it gets mapped. So it basically facilitates the need to be able to write scripts or use mail merge or any of that to be able to load that data. And we're going to cover exporting large data sets out of your CA PPM. What we're going to be utilizing for that is what's called the Query API. So for those of you that are not familiar with what the Query API really means, the Query API basically allows you to extract data utilizing NSQL queries. Okay. So basically, any portlet that you may have within inside of CA PPM now becomes exportable into either Excel or CSV. And we're going to cover how either you can utilize the XOG bridge, or we might go over what the API call for that XOG is. So you can visualize it, so you can insert it into a gel script if that's necessary. Then we're going to cover pivoting your CA PPM data. So we're going to show you a couple of examples that we've done in the past where you pre-write your pivots inside of your Excel, and then from those particular pivots, then you can visualize your data in different graphs and forms so you can share that across with your business. Last but not least, we're going to be getting into the tips and tricks. Some of them are going to be, we're going to cover maybe some auto numbering with XOG, XSLT, part of the undocumented API. So I think today for the undocumented API, we're going to cover action items to show you how you can actually XOG in and out action items. Object and attribute definition. I think this is a big component of what I want to cover, which is, there's always an object and attribute definition. That object and attribute definition stored inside of the database. Well, it's really handy to understand the object and attribute definition inside of your CA PPM toolset prior to XOGing. And that's going to eliminate a lot of mistakes or a lot of problems, a lot of errors that you're going to get simply because you might not have the correct lookup values or the correct lookups inserted inside of your XOG. So this gives you the ability to be able to map data. And then I'm going to utilize some validation queries. And I don't know how common this is for you guys. You want to migrate some object definition, let's say from dev to test, and you want to validate that all of your attributes are there, or all of your views are there, or particular permissions are there. What I normally do is I utilize queries and export them to Excel, and then I can compare the values between two Excel components. And that gives me, basically, I can just do a differences, and that gives me an idea of whether all of my data has been inserted or not. Now, how to reach out for help. The first thing I recommend is you utilize our KB site, which is kb.it-ROI-solutions.com. There's video tutorials and all sorts of nice information there, as well as a help and support form. So if you have, like I said, if you have any issues or any concerns, enhancement requests are what we're most interested in. Obviously, if there's a bug or something that isn't working, we encourage you guys to open tickets. I know that this is a free tool, and people sometimes feel guilty opening up tickets. We want you to open tickets. We want to know what people are thinking, whether people are using it, and what people are not using inside of the tool. As most of you know that have seen me do webinars in the past, I'm not really a PowerPoint guy, so I'm going to take the slides and end the slides for now, and I'm going to go directly into the web interface here. So this is the main screen for the XOG bridge. Okay, so this is the home page for the XOG Query Bridge. And on the home page, you basically have the main layout of the tool. You've got the URLs. When I say the URLs, these are the URLs that your tool set connects to, or that you have rights to connect to, and some statuses of your loads. Then we also have the desktop client for these tools, and that's usually common if you have your XOG on-premise, your Clarity on-premise, and this particular web interface does not have access to your on-premise Clarity, so you download the desktop version. I just want to let people know that also, if they are interested in getting this web version, we also provide the web version so you guys can install it locally inside of your environment. So, and that's really handy if you don't want to support the desktop version of the XOG bridge and you just want to have a web version. The web version has a lot of benefits since it retains all of the web service calls inside of the database. Therefore, it provides easier auditing, and if you have an error or if you have a problem, then you can go back and take a look and see what the actual issues were. All right. So there's three main functionalities with the tool. It has the XOG requests. So when I click on the XOG request, you have two options. You can either enter, copy, paste your XML. okay, is one thing, and then you can do a bulk request. Bulk request is super handy if you have multiple files that you want to zog in, right, and you want to zog them in order. Let's say as long as you put them in alphabetical order, it'll process them in order. That's functionality number one. That's pushing data in. Executing queries. So in this case, you can write queries directly against the database through this window, okay, and it'll dynamically transform these queries to NSQL and build them for you inside of your Clarity environment. That's one option. And the other option is to run existing queries. So this will go through and take a look at all of the queries that you have inside of your database, okay, inside of your NSQLs, and allow you to execute those queries. But let's say, for example, here I want to run a query. I want to have the name and the ID of what's in the investment table. I literally say select name ID from INB investments. And I'm going to give that query a name. I say run query. It's going to execute the results and allow me to export these to Excel. But if I go into my Clarity environment that was connected to, we can see that it created that particular query inside of my NSQL, okay, and it dynamically builds the NSQL for me. So this is also handy for people that aren't very familiar with the functionality of NSQL. Now, I want you to keep in mind that this is only used for one-dimensional NSQL queries, so it's not really handy for multi-dimensional NSQL queries. But it's very handy to write and embed and extract data directly from your CA PPM environment. So this is very handy for on-demand clients, right, where you need to query something, but you don't necessarily want to want a VPN in just to get some simple data out of the database, right? You know, with on-demand, that's the only other option is you log into the database, you VPN, and you extract the data using, you know, some type of Oracle thin client, like Toad or whatever it may be, right? This allows you to query the database directly through the API layer. I'm gonna stop for a couple of seconds because I got a few questions that have come in. The first question is, will this webinar be recorded and shared? Yes, absolutely. All of our webinars are usually recorded and then shared. Everyone that registered will get a link to this webinar, as well as it gets posted on our blog, on our website. The next question is, can you discuss how to zog out multiple fields in one zog? So I'm not 100% sure what you mean. I mean, obviously there is a way to zog out multiple fields by utilizing the Query API, okay, which basically are multiple different fields within inside of one zog, but that's really to do data extracts. If you're talking about doing object or instance extracts, I can cover that, but if you can just give me a little bit more detail on exactly what your scenario is, yes, I can definitely cover that. Then I have the next one. What's the turnaround time for resolving open tickets? So obviously it depends on the severity of the ticket, right? And tickets, depending whether, you know, obviously if it's a systems down, and because of the number of users that we have utilizing the XOG bridge, usually we have an SLA for system down of 1 hour, okay? So that's a SEV 1. SEV 2 tickets are usually dealt with within 4 hours. SEV 3 and SEV 4 now are just in a couple of business days. But this tool falls under the exact same support agreement that our paid tools fall under. So, you know, if there's a need, we can definitely cover the SLAs for support agreements later on in this webinar if I have time. The next one is, are the URLs auto set or would the user have to create a favorites list? So the URLs, I'm gonna go to the home page here just so, you know, I'm not 100% sure I understand the question here, but we have here the URL manager, okay? So if you need to create a new URL, right, we're gonna say, you know, I don't know, I wanna do HTTP myclarity.com, and I'm going to call this my clarity, right? And then I add that URL, okay? So People can add as many URLs as they like, or they can delete the URLs. Obviously, it gave me an error saying that it couldn't connect to the server, and that's because this particular URL doesn't exist. So I'm going to delete that URL. I'm going to delete a couple of these, which I actually know that no longer exist as well. I know that this one doesn't exist. So, usually you have the URLs that you personally connect to, right? Because we do consulting, we have lots of different URLs. But in general, you would have your own profile. The next question, is the web version open source free, or is there a subscription cost? There is no cost for this tool. And as I mentioned, you can either utilize it on our server, or if you open a request, we do provide the software for you to install it on premise. And that's common, like I mentioned before, for clients that have CA PPM on premise. The next, can this tool work with CA PPM SaaS and not an on-site deployment? Absolutely. Like I said, we utilize everything through the API layer. Therefore, because we're going through the API layer, it's irrelevant whether you're on premise or on demand. The next one, what are the restrictions to use SQL in this window, like asterisk functions? So, we're limited to what is supported by the NSQL. Obviously, asterisks are not supported by NSQL. Functions are supported, but they have to be very well written, usually because it's the query, right? The function is usually just called throughout a query, such as a table. So then you wouldn't have any issues with functions or anything. But basically, if you couldn't put it in an NSQL window, this isn't going to work. Okay. Normally, what I recommend that people do is they write an inline view for their query to make sure that any to-date functions or to-char functions, that kind of thing, get inserted in. And for those people that need a hand in understanding how to write inline views, feel free to reach out to me. Next question is, assuming this works for MS SQL as well? Absolutely. Like I said, all this really does, what I've done on the execute query, okay, all this does is when you write a query, it builds an NSQL. So it doesn't matter whether it's SQL Server or Oracle, it's really database independent. Next one is, does it build an NSQL every time? Well, no, it either creates or updates. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. In this case here, right, we said we named this particular query and we gave it this ID of AA demo query. All right, so here I'm going to say I want to do select name code ID from INV investments. But I'm going to use that same query ID, all right? And here I'm going to say run query. All this is going to do is Y. Select name code ID. Oh, that's because I'm connected to my Clarity. Let me change my my environment here. So here it says that the current query already exists. Do I want to override it? So I'm going to say yes. What it does is, because I gave it the same name and the same ID, right? It now created and added that field to that particular query. So it either creates or updates. So next question is, so the web version is something you host, or would be install this on our own instance? As I mentioned before, we do host it. This particular version that we're seeing here is hosted on our environment, but if you open up a request with our team, we do provide the software so you guys can host your own web version. As I mentioned, this is common for people that are on-premise. So if you have an on-premise implementation and you want to utilize the web version because you don't want to utilize the desktop version, then you would ask us for this software and we would help you get it installed on your environment. All right, so the first question on the multiple attributes. So they said to expand the multiple attributes. Let's say I created new attributes on the project object, and I want to ZOG those out of dev and ZOG into the test environment. All right. So we're talking about migrating attributes. Yeah, and let me and I'm gonna cover that. I'm gonna do the an object read, object write, and specifically when I get into XSLT is really when I'm going to cover how to do that. All right, but by default, if you use the object read and you put the project, right, it will dynamically grab those custom attributes and ZOG them out of your dev environment and push them into your test environment. The question that you want to keep in mind when you do object pulls is the sheer size and the sheer amount of noise that comes out of an object pull. You want to be very careful with, right? So whenever you pull out an object, what happens is it pulls out all the referential data related to that object. And what I mean by that is, it doesn't just pull out the attributes, it'll pull out the lookups, the portlets, absolutely anything that's ever been associated with that object, any sub-object that's related to that object would go through and get pulled out. And that's why the XSLT is very handy, because it helps you trim down that noise and send in just what you're looking to change within your environment. Okay. Hopefully that answered your question. Never mind, just answered the question. All right, perfect. So the next question is, so it will have the smarts to pick out whatever you define as your dimension key when it ports it to end SQL. That's I'm going to say yes and no. Usually it's not quite that smart. It's smart enough to pick the first field. And that wasn't, I guess I didn't really get into advanced end SQL components. But yes, what you want to do in this case, in my particular case for this example, I would not want to write this like this. I would want to write this like this. Why? Because as he mentioned, you want your dimension key to be a unique value. And in that particular case, I was using name. Name isn't necessarily a unique value. Also, queries when, best practices for writing queries is that you don't use string fields as a dimension key. Just because usually, specifically when you get into multi-dimensional queries, the dimensions are used for grouping of items, okay? And grouping items through the API layer at the string level is very slow. So it's not really best practices. And thank you for pointing that out. So yes, the first field is going to be your dimension key. Next question is, if we elect to install the web version on our own hardware, is there documentation pertaining what operating systems, web, app servers, blah, blah, blah? Yeah. So I'm gonna actually open up this site here. Like I said, if you go to our KB site, and I'm gonna see actually if we have that as an installation guide on here or not. But oh yeah, we do. Here we go. So absolutely, okay. We have the installation guide and the introduction details. So usually when we install the XOG bridge, okay, the XOG bridge really comes with two different components. The first component is the XOG and Query Bridge, and the second component is going to be the integration manager that gets installed as well. I don't know if I'm going to have time to cover the integration manager during this webinar, and it's kind of out of scope for this webinar, but yes, absolutely. Go to our KB site, and on our KB site, you're going to get all the documentation that you require. And like I said, you also get, we provide a few hours of assistance to help you get that installed and implemented. Most of our clients, just so you know, install this on their test server. They don't install it on their Clarity production server, and just because you don't necessarily want to, provision new hardware just for this component, And that's why they put this directly on their test server. All right. Wow. All right. I think I've covered the questions so far, and I really do appreciate you guys asking lots of questions. Like I said, it really helps us understand, you know, what you guys want to get out of this. So like I mentioned, whatever it is that you guys want to get out of this particular webinar, feel free to ask. I know that, you know, it might chew up some time and we might not be able to cover some of the items, but it doesn't matter. You know, if we don't cover all of the items, we can always repeat this webinar, or, you know, we can do one-on-ones if needed. You know, our goal is to make sure that you guys understand the XOG API as much as possible. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. All right, so as I mentioned during the PowerPoint, the first thing I wanted to cover is the data loader, right? So what is the data loader? The data loader is just a basic template, and I'm going to show, let me see. Let me select the projects. Now, I'm selecting projects because when we ship the product, we have a whole bunch of pre-built templates, but that doesn't mean that you can't create your own. I'm actually going to come back here. You can always just come here and create a new one with whatever you want. What is the criteria that you need to create a template? You really just need to understand what the XML is going to look like. All right, pretty straightforward. In this case, right, you know, so, and you want to pick the fields that you want to load. All right, so in this case, I want to do a project load, and as a matter of fact, I'm gonna look and make sure that in my file system, I actually have a CSV file for projects here. And here, I'm going to actually come back here. All right, so this is, let's say that this is the file that I want to load, all right? And as you can see, I actually, this file, I pulled out of Clarity. So I actually queried that data out. Okay, so key components that you want to make sure, right? There's no spaces at the start of your file, right? Because the way this is going to map, it's going to utilize the first row as your attribute header, all right? So that's what it's going to map your values to, all right? The other key thing is give the values of your headers meaningful names, okay? Also, you know, try and think of standard coding rules, you know, no spaces in the names, that kind of thing, right? That really is going to, Java and other, you know, programming languages are not really all that friendly to spaces and names, all right? So I'm gonna close this, and I'm gonna come back here, all right? So let's say that this is the template of the XML data that I want to load, all right? Now, if you build your template, okay, so you notice the syntax for each attribute, all right, I have $, squirrely bracket, and a name. And a name. So if you make this name match this name, all right, it's going to automatically map those values for you. So that's why I said it's important to use meaningful names, okay? If you don't know, you know, exactly what your header should look like, click on download a sample file, and it's gonna just allow you to download an Excel file with headers that match these values, okay? Once you're happy with your template, I'm gonna get rid of the OBS because I know that I don't have any OBSs. Actually, I don't want to edit this template. I'm gonna just say next. All right, so with inside of here, you can see that it took all of the variables, okay, that were in that XML and put them here, okay? So it was smart enough to read those variables. Now, what do I want to do? I'm going to go read for a file, so it maps to a file. So I'm going to click Browse, and now it took all of the values from that CSV file, and you see here, it took the active, and it mapped it to active here, okay? And here the same with, but you notice here, for example, INV finish date, it says here none, okay? And that's probably because it couldn't find a match in the header. So I'm going to look for the value that I want. And it's probably going to be finish date, and I'm going to say the same probably for start date. And this one's name, I'm going to say investment name, there we go. And this one here should be investment code. And OBS complete, I'm gonna talk about that field in a couple of seconds. All right, so here I've basically mapped all of the fields to the fields I have in my Excel value, in my Excel headers. So I'm gonna click next. Next thing it does is it's gonna grab that Excel and it's gonna build an XML file, all right, for every single one of those records that I have, all right? So you see here, now I can visualize all of those records that I have, okay? So all right, so there's big benefits like everything. There's pros and cons to everything, okay? In this case, why did we select to build single projects as opposed to trying to put, let's say 50 projects inside of a single projects tag, okay? The main reason is because when you load this data, right, if you get an error and you have 50 projects, the odds are that all of your 50 projects are going to fail, okay? And then you're going to have to do needle through a haystack to find where the error is, okay? As opposed to here, for all of these projects that we have here, okay, it's going to run one at a time and it's going to give you an error one at a time, okay? I'm going to click here, I'm going to say run file. I'm hoping that, actually these will error out. I'm going to say attach the results in an email and send a notification when complete. I know that that particular load is going to fail, and I'm hoping that it fails anyways because the OBS tags are not completed, and I'm hoping that it fails just because I don't need that additional data in my demo environment, okay? So here you can see it basically starts requesting how to send that file, okay? And now you can see it's sending 22 out of 82. Let's just wait for it to come back, okay? So what I want to show you is a couple of the big benefits on how to pinpoint where your errors are, all right? In general, when you get a response from XOG, the first response that you're going to get is, you have number of records sent, failures, updated, inserts, total. I think it is. So here I'm going to download. Okay, so here, right, it has the request files, right? So all of the files that it sent, so it sent these 82 files, but I want you to notice here on the naming structure, all right? So as a matter of fact, if I go back and I look at the zip file, okay, so it gives me the zip file, it gives me the date that it was run, but right away, if I look at the file name, I know that there was a serious problem because it's telling me that total were 0, inserted was 0, updated were 0, and failed were 0. Let me open one of these. So I knew that I was going to get a problem, right? A fatal problem. So whenever I don't get a single response back, I know that it's some type of Java lang exception, meaning XOG wasn't even smart enough to send back a failure, a status on the records, all right? So it gives me an invalid XML exception. So let's actually go back and fix these. So I'm going to come back to the data loader. I'm going to look for that project. Right? And I want to edit this template. So I'm going to say, because I know that this was going to cause a problem. And I'm going to get rid of this custom information I don't need either. And let's say, okay, now I have all of the fields mapped again. I'm going to click next. And I can pretty much rest assured that this is going to work. Oh, I don't like this template. I think this is going to make it fail. But anyways, and I can run the file. So this gives you the ability to be able to manipulate your data changes and make it quick. The other advantage that this tool has is if a value is blank, it will remove the complete tag. And now that's important because if you send an empty string value, it's usually going to fail, specifically if there's a lookup associated with that. So I got a question just now that I actually wanted to cover. All right, it says, does the data loader validate the lookup data type mismatch, or do we only know that at runtime through XOG? All right, and that's when I started talking at the very beginning about being able to write queries and find out data related to queries, right, of what's really available and what's not available. All right, so I'm gonna actually do I'm gonna run this particular query, and I'm gonna show you how you can do that dynamically in flight. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run this query that gets me all of the attributes that are in a particular object, as well as all the lookup associations with those attributes, and then we can map that to a lookup definition. And then it's a simple VLOOKUP that you would need to do inside of your Excel prior to loading. The tool in itself does not do that validation. In this case, we have an Excel tool that does that, for those of you that might be interested in seeing that. But in this case, this is more of, let's say, a XOG admin tool. The Excel tool, which does exactly what you're asking for, is more of an end user tool, right? Somebody, a PM or a resource manager or someone that doesn't really understand the data behind all of these fields would do that, all right? So I'm going to come back and I'm going to execute these. Actually, I don't even know if I have time to execute these queries. I'm going to see if I have them here. So this is this query that I ran, and if you guys need a copy of that query, I can get it to you, right? It basically gives you the object name, right? The data type of the field, right? If there's a lookup associated with it, what the data size. So all of these items are important to you, okay? And the lookup type, okay? What the object name is and the partition that it's associated with. So these are the main key criteria that you need to understand when you're zogging in an item or you're zogging in instance data, right? What are the data validations that XOG is going to require for you to be able to load that data, okay? So like I said, it doesn't do any of the validations for you. What it does do, like I said, is it at least allows you to pinpoint where the error is and allows you to easily fix that error, okay? So that's query number one that you are going to want to execute, right? This one here, okay? So this gives you, like I said, this gives you the attributes that are associated with an object, right? Then we're going to want to do the lookups. And I had already pulled these lookups here. So based on the ID of the lookup, you can get the lookup type, right? As well as the values, as well as, the only time where this gets a little bit complicated and you can't really use VLOOKUPs is when you have dependent lookups. So a particular value of one field is dependent on a value of another field, right? That's a little bit more difficult, a little trickier to do in a VLOOKUP. But I'm gonna cover something very, very quickly. I'm gonna show you sort of how, when we do our Excel, how sort of that works. I'm just gonna open up an Excel file here. So I'm gonna show you how you can actually build VLOOKUPs and how you can associate fields with inside of Excel. I'm going to look for projects here so I can show you sort of how you can configure all of that, you know. So here, for example, right, we specify the values as well as the lookups that are associated with that particular attribute. So this gives you a way, you know, in this case here, I know, for example, that this field, for example, the manager resource ID, I know that it's associated with the resource browse, right? And then I do a simple lookup on a lookups field that's called resource browse. And that's how you can do a VLOOKUP based on those values. Like I said, there is a high level of complexity in doing this, right? And like I said, and that's why we offer an Excel interface to do those types of validations, because we want to make the Excel end user friendly, right? You can't really give the other component to an end user, you know, but you can definitely give the Excel to an end user. So like I said, the validations are let's say that they're for the paid version of this data loader tool. They're not for the free version. So then I have a question here that says, how are we pulling the lookup ID or modification changes? You know, I'm going to have to, I don't really understand what you mean. I'm guessing that you're asking whether value A was different from value B. But I'm not 100% sure. The next thing I get is, yes, please provide that query. I'm actually gonna go through a couple of the queries that I think you guys might need. So, you know, because I didn't really have a chance to do a tenth of the things that I wanted to do in this demo, just because we got a lot of questions, but that's fine. So I'm gonna get you the lookups, the attributes that are in a particular system. So I'll get the attributes. What else? File, that's not the one I want. I'm going to also give you views. Let's see, where do I have that? This gets the views from a system. So when you want to compare, you know, when you do an object migration from, let's say, dev to test, and you want to check to make sure that all your views are exactly the same, that's what this particular query does. Yeah, this is the custom attributes, lookup values associated to those custom attributes, get more lookups in custom attributes, and then we get into groups and all sorts of stuff that are not quite necessary. Another item that I didn't really get a chance to cover that I really want to spend a couple of seconds trying to at least get into a little bit is the undocumented API, because so I'm gonna ask a quick question for those of you that are paying attention. How many of you have a need to XOG in action items into CA PPM? If I get any yeses, I'm gonna share that. Otherwise, okay, I got one yes for now. So I'm gonna also share the action item API. Like I said, that's an unpublished API. It was built, I'm gonna say, in version 12 for a timesheet component that CA was trying to build. Oh, here we go. Action item write XML. So I will also provide this action item API. So it's basically how to approve or send statuses of an action item directly through the API layer. There's one key piece that you need to be aware of for this, which is you can only approve action items that were assigned to you, okay? Meaning, if I send John an action item, I can't approve it through the API layer. Okay, but all right, I can show you guys how to do it via a process where you can hijack that user session to update that action item if that's necessary. I've seen that particular case, for example, with some timesheet approvals, and I'm gonna cover some of that probably on the next session. I only have 2 minutes left. So in these 2 minutes, and like I said, I didn't cover all of the information. So a couple of things I would love to get from you guys is, if you want to see the rest of the XOG piece, like I said, maybe we can cover a couple of more topics. If you guys can spend 30 seconds giving me some dates of when you would be interested, I'll gladly continue this webinar on a future time, specifically, this month. So please feel free to set up some times if you guys want. If you guys have any other questions or anything, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm gonna, for those of you that like I said, that are interested in installing the XOG bridge locally, please don't hesitate to reach out to us as well, and we'll gladly get that started for you. Like I said, there are a lot of other benefits of installing this. For example, the data loader component isn't available in the desktop version, and there is a lot of other functionality that is only available in the web version. Like I said, most common use cases are either if you're on premise, or if you have a particular data policy that you don't want your data going through a third-party server, then you would want to install this locally. So for those of you guys that are interested, please do that. And I don't want to take any more of your time, guys. I really want to thank you for joining us, and really thanks a lot. I really enjoyed this. This was very interactive. I think we had a ton of questions, and we'll get on. We'll try and get another webinar later on this month to help you guys. And thanks again. I want to thank everybody. Bye.